This is KCCK's Culture Crawl. I'm Dennis Green, and my guest today is Steve Semken. Steve is the owner, proprietor, general manager, director, chief cook, and bottle washer for Ice Cube Press, publisher located in North Liberty, Iowa. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me in. I took a break from my bottle washing. Actually, I do feel like that's kind of the sort of job I'd end up with.
Yeah, everything from author relations to emptying the waste baskets, right?
Yes. I'm an expert at recycling now.
So you have a event with some of your authors coming up in about a week at Prairie Lights, and we'll talk specifically about that in just a minute. But for those who aren't familiar with Ice Cube Press, tell me a little bit about how long you've been around, what kind, what's your niche in terms of publishing, and a little bit of the background.
Right. Well, thanks for asking, because I always feel like I'm always trying to reinvent myself. So sometimes I'm like, it feels like I've barely been around, but I was thinking the other day, I started in 1993, and so, man, I've been going at it for almost 24, 25 years, and I hear people talk about, boy, I've had the same job for 20 years, and I think to myself, you know what? I can actually relate to that, it turns out. And so I started out just wanting to be a writer, and then I just turned into a publisher, and I've sort of taken an interest in promoting writing and any sort of writing on how we can better understand and improve living here in the Midwest. And so it's not just Iowa in particular, but just sort of this vague area that everyone questions me on, like, would you include Western Kansas? Would you include Ohio? And I always think, well, there's a certain amount of seasons that pass, and there's a certain amount of language styles. And so I don't have a specific, 13-state region, I think. But the one thing that I think makes me different than some publishers is that I will take any form of writing as a way to explore that. It's not because, do you take stories or do you take poetry? But it's like I take all those things because I see that poetry can tell you how you live somewhere, and stories can tell you how you live somewhere, and nonfiction. And, I've even done a reader's play with Mary Swander at one point as well. So any form to help us better understand how we can best live here.
Well, over 24 years, you've seen just a few changes in how the publishing game works.
Yes. Yeah, I know. Well, it is a little weird because I think I come across as fairly young because I do sort of an enthusiastic publishing idea. But like in my time of doing this, I don't think I even had an email address when I first started. It was just me at a computer, and I remember doing the first publication and going down and doing halftone strips with the printer and just be like, no, we need this many lines. And so many things have sort of, I appreciate having that knowledge now because I understand black and white printing, or I understand how you print something, and I have worked at a print shop. And sometimes I have to remind myself that a lot of people connect with me now through the internet or through web pages or through Facebook or Twitter. And so in my list of priorities, I often think, the book is the most important thing, which it is to me. But on the other hand, I'm like, most people are going to hear about me for the internet. So over time, I can sense how my priorities have changed on what I probably need to do first if I line them up like that. And it's exciting, though. I mean, I can't imagine doing everything. It's exciting because you're always rediscovering a way to connect with people, and that is, I've embraced that as a challenge and as a way to keep my mind active and keep going at it.
Your new release is called Fracture, and it's a short story collection, correct?
It's essays.
Or essay.
Actually,
it's a collection of short works.
Right. Actually, I was saying this thing that main guy is Taylor Brorby, and he has a great way of describing the book. And so it's entitled Fracture: Essays, Poetry, and Stories on Fracking in America. And it's a pretty big issue right now. And his main thing when he wanted this book, he remembers. I remember meeting him in Ames, Iowa, at an event, but he had come up to me and said, I grew up in North Dakota, and my home is being invaded by fracking. And I honestly knew about fracking, but not to the extent that I do now, the whole process of chemicals and how the land is changing. And he had just told me that he would love the chance to put a collection together and use the arts as a way to better understand a place. And he had said, the question is, these are his words, the question I've been mulling over is this: can a poem stop a pipeline? And normally when he says that, people kind of chuckle, but he goes on to say, if we have art that speaks deeply to us, which we do, we go to art museums, we understand that art has a place in this world. Doesn't it make sense that art can also move us to re-envision our place on the planet? Our connection to other animals, to ecosystems. We are bombarded with journalism every day, but stories and poems and essays, these have a way of staying with us. And I love that approach that he took. And the book is a mixture of short stories. John Kenyon from Iowa City is in the collection, and he has a short story. For Prairie Lights, it's a pretty good mix because you have Amy Weldon coming down from Decorah, and she has a essay on environmentalism and political activism from a female point of view. And so that's another way of understanding this larger issue. I've sort of discovered that this book, Fracture, is about a whole lot more than fracking. It's about how we can deal with changes where we live and how we can address issues. Whether it's there's 4 pieces on there on feminist responses to how you can be an activist and how you can enable change. And then, of course, there's poetry in there that has to do with fracking, which is just in 15 lines, you realize to yourself, actually, they've made a really amazing point. And it does make me pause and think and re-envision and rethink how things are happening where we live. Because fracking is certainly not just a North Dakota issue at this point. It's Oklahoma earthquakes. It's New York. They have a lot of issues going on there with not allowing fracking to happen there. And then Iowa has the pipeline coming through and lots of things, but I'm not the right person to ask any more questions.
Not the
than
science,
that.
Yeah. This is not about the science necessarily.
Plus, if you ask me one more question after that, I'll be like, Taylor will be at Prairie Lights on the 26th.
And speaking of that,
right.
You have an event coming up with several of the authors who are involved at Prairie Lights.
Yes, March 26th, 5 p.m. It's not the 7 o'clock time, it's the 5 o'clock time because it's Saturday. And it's going to be Taylor Brorby, the main editor of the book, John Kenyon, Iowa City, City of Literature, Tyler Priest, who's with the University of Iowa and has a good essay in the book on the history of fracking. It's called Frackensteins, is the first word in the essay. So he gets a unique point of view on that. And then Amy Weldon is up at Luther College is coming down also. And it should be a good time to hear how arts help you understand an issue, but also a chance to ask them questions about fracking or writing or understanding all sorts of exciting stuff.
Can a poem stop a pipeline? You'll answer that question, at least to some extent.
Yes, they will.
Steve Semken from Ice Cube Press in North Liberty. It's a reading event to celebrate the release of Fracture, the collection that is new from Ice Cube Press. And again, it's a week from tomorrow, Saturday, the 26th, then, you said at 5 o'clock?
5 p.m., March 26th, right. Prairie
And
Lights, downtown Iowa City, for those of you that... Every once in a while, someone will say, "Where's Prairie Lights Bookstore?"
There are some people who don't know where Prairie Lights is.
So it's right on Dubuque Street, 12 South Dubuque Street, and you can always find out about the events on their website or my website.
It's and what is your website if people want to find out more about this release or your other releases?
It's unique. It's icecubepress.com.
Oh,
and I managed to get my own thing. I know Prairie Lights, prairielights.com. Well, early on, it seemed like you did have a lot of black slashes and stuff like that. But, there's plenty of ways to find out about it. And the collection itself is pretty remarkable. You'll have to tell me when to stop talking because I'll just keep rambling forever. But it's a real amazing collection of environmental authors. A lot of, I would say some of our best environmental thinkers. There's, and this may be just nothing to a lot of people, but there's Rick Bass in there. There's Allison Hawthorne Dimming. There's, most people know of Bill McKibben, and he's included in the book. Deborah Marquardt out of Iowa State. Derek Jensen, who's a well-known environmentalist. There's just so many that it's really rewarding to see how they've all responded to these two editors, Taylor and Stephanie Trout. They just put out a call, and it gives you a real sense of how exciting it is to be a publisher and a writer at the same time, because they join together. Because you sometimes think these well-known authors are people that you can't reach or that they'll never respond to what you do. And so when you put a book together like Fracture, it's almost 500 pages. And just to see these well-known authors come together with some of these people that have written for the first time. And it's a great way to explore this this particular issue of fracking, and so many times, like, I hadn't known that much about it, and I have read the book now 3 or 4 times, and you just realize the depth of people's passion for it. Because I was at a library event, and one of the librarians came up to me and said, "They're trying to ruin my farm because they're coming in to buy the land by me to get the mineral rights to get the fracking." And she was nearly in tears, just like, "How can you help me stop this?" And you realize a book like this has so much passion in the writing itself. And so even if you don't care about fracking and you just love a good short story or a good essay, these people put so much energy into it that you realize that that is where these two things combine, this sort of praxis of life, how we get art merging with reality. It's really, I think it's pretty unique for that alone.
The book is Fracture. It's a collection of essays and stories on the subject of fracking. And again, several of the authors, including the editor,
Right,
Taylor,
Brorby will be here.
who edited it, will be at Prairie Lights on Saturday the 26th at 5 p.m. And again, if people want more information, they can visit your website, which is?
Absolutely. www.icecubepress.com.
Steve Semken from Ice Cube Press. Steve, thanks for coming in today.
Thank you for having me in. It's always a pleasure.